No, I'm older than you. You paved the way for the rest of us.
Well, I don't know. Let's not go crazy. But by the way, I got a little abuse in the papers last week because I got all over Paul Finebaum.
Were you mean to Paul?
With the Lincoln Raleigh. Did you see this?
Wow.
With the Lincoln Raleigh.
Wow, Paul,
you were a bit
Paul,
hard.
I apologize that I wasn't here to referee that, but I'm here now, so let's make it happen.
You were a bit
Big Ten Media Day starts today, and there's a whole lot to talk about. Okay, the Big Ten will be the Big 18 this season as the conference has expanded for the first time in 10 years with the addition of former Pac-12 members USC, UCLA, Washington, and Oregon. 18 teams is the most of any FBS conference. Ohio State picked to finish first in the conference's preseason media bowl, followed by Oregon, Penn State, and defending national champ Michigan. The Buckeyes are also the favorite on ESPN Bet at plus 150. But if Ohio State is going to win the Big Ten, it'll have to get over its recent troubles against Michigan. Buckeyes head coach Ryan Day is 1-3 against Michigan and 40-0 in all of their Big Ten games. Day spoke on Get Up earlier about being better against their biggest rival.
I think probably one of the biggest struggles that we have is that, when you lose a game like that, you have to wait a whole nother year to get back into that game. And, for our guys who decided to come back, we had about 12 guys that made the decision to come back. That was one of the big reasons why they decided to come back. But what we have to do is build every day and grow every day and count on the work that we're doing on a daily basis that's going to matter as we get to the end of the season. And, what we can't do is get too far ahead of ourselves and start to focus too much on that and get distracted. That's just the bottom line. But when you come to Ohio State, you got to win that game.
All right, Paul, you're up first, my friend. You don't look too amused. Is Ryan Day...
Ryan Day,
Yeah, go ahead, Paul.
Molly, I have no idea what he's talking about. I mean, he's lost that game 3 years in a row, and he's talking about how his players are motivated to come back and play. Well, I heard that 3 years ago, 2 years ago, and last year, and you stunk in all 3 games. I mean, what are you talking about? And here's the problem with talking about Ryan Day. You look at his record, and I'm sure Doggy will quote it and Stephen A. will quote it. It's gaudy. Nobody has a record like him, except you can't choke the biggest game of the year. And to me, if he can't beat Michigan this year when he's got probably the best team in the country along with Georgia, after Harbaugh leaves, after all those great players depart, after a national championship, he ought to be gone. I mean, that is, it's simple as that. That's the biggest game of the year in the Big Ten. And I realize that Ohio State played for a national championship a couple of years ago against Alabama. Only lost by 28 points. They've been to the playoffs, but that program hasn't won a national championship since 2014 when Urban Meyer was there. So quit making excuses, Ryan Day. Quit acting like your players have given up something to come back. 3 years ago they came back, 2 years ago they came back, and 1 year ago they came back, and it's been the same result. Versus the last 3 games against Michigan.
Well, the one thing I would say, Paul, is 2 years ago they made up for the loss when they lost to Michigan because they went to go play Georgia and they played a tremendous game. And if the kid makes a field goal, albeit long, they would have been in a national championship game, and that game was after. So I am going to say that to be fair.
But they didn't, Doggy. They lost the game.
Yeah, but they played great the game,
They had a 14-point lead. I mean, they blew it.
Well, that Marvin Harrison had a concussion. I mean, they played well in the game. Be fair. New Year's Eve, Georgia played well. They played well against Georgia. Be fair. Be fair. You got to be fair on that one. Number 2, I'm going to put the onus on James Franklin. I'm going to put the onus on James Franklin. How about Franklin showing up there and winning a big game once in his life? He never beats Ohio State. He never beats Michigan. Now, he'll call timeout up 54-0 to kick a field goal with 2 seconds to go against Temple. He'll do that. Oh, he'll do that. I got to get my field goal practice. Field goal kicker practice. He'll do that all day. But when is James Franklin? What is he, 0-11, Paulie? You tell me. What is his record against Michigan and Penn State? He never beats them. And he gets 2 cracks a year, one of which are at home.
Yeah, he stole a win or 2 in there somewhere, but it's been so long ago I can't remember.
So that's the issue I would have, Stevie. I would say Penn State, more so than Ohio State.
Listen, I get where you're coming from because obviously you, James Franklin, you got to do a little bit something. You got to enter the equation. It can't be all about a Michigan and Ohio State if you're in the Big Ten. You got to enter the fray to some degree and make sure that your presence is felt. Fair enough. But I'm going to look at Ryan Day because, listen, 40-0 outside of 3 losses against Michigan in the conference. That's something spectacular, and we got to give credit where credit is due. We got to and not only that, he succeeded Urban Meyer. So that's not easy shoes to fill. But he's done it, okay? So we got to give credit where credit is due. They haven't won a Big Ten championship since 2020, though. And then when you look at them, they haven't won a national championship since 2014. We got to pay attention to those things. Here's the thing, and Paul knows this better than me. You do too. When you get the job at Ohio State, what's the number one obligation you have? Beat Michigan. Beat Michigan. And he's not doing that. Now, here's where it gets interesting. We recognize that Jim Harbaugh is one of the greatest coaches we've ever seen. We can't even argue about that anymore. When you consider the job he did at Stanford, when you consider the job that he did in San Francisco, really, really turning that franchise around and doing what he did, getting them to the Super Bowl, and Colin Kaepernick and them came on strong in the second half, and you know, almost when the lights went out, almost won the Super Bowl against the Baltimore Ravens, right? Then he goes to Michigan. He inherits that program, and he turns that around. Ultimately, they're in the playoffs a couple of years before obviously closing the deal and winning a national championship. And to beat Ohio State, considering the level of dominance, I don't know if it was 8 or 9 straight times that Ohio State had beaten them, but ultimately closed that deal, beat them the last 3 years. You look at Jim Harbaugh, and he's universally revered and recognized one of the great, great coaches in football today. If you're Ryan Day, here's how that works against you, Paul. Well, what's your excuse now? Because Harbaugh's gone. So you can't turn around where Ohio State having a roster that it has, with the expectations that it has, with no Jim Harbaugh now coaching Michigan, and you turn around and you lose to Michigan again. That could spell trouble for him. That still is on you. You got to get it done because Harbaugh is not there any longer. You got to beat Michigan this year.
Paul, let me say one thing to you on this, and I think you're going to agree. These regular season rivalries, and none better than this one, but Alabama, Auburn, USC, UCLA, you name anyone you want to name, they're going to lose a little impact now with all these teams making the playoffs in college football. Because if Ohio State loses to Michigan, but makes the playoff anyway, which is what they're going to do, and then they advance to the championship game, and Michigan loses in the first round, what do you care about? Don't you want to go as long as you can? Don't you want to play for a title, and despite losing to Michigan? So I think it loses a lot of impact, this rivalry, based on so many teams, 12, in the playoff format. What's your take with that? Let me hear.
Well, I mean, I understand your point, but I disagree with it because this is like the NFL, Doggy, and that game is at the end of the season. So it may or may not determine who gets to the Big Ten championship game. And if you're fighting to get in there, that's going to help you with what? With seeding. You have a lot of things at stake. If you're the highest ranked conference team in the Big Ten, you get a bye. That means you don't have to play on the road maybe in Tuscaloosa or LSU or somewhere else in the country. That's a big deal. I mean, you guys follow the NFL every week. How big is it that last game? Do you get a bye or not? Are you in the wild card game or do you sit at home? There's a tremendous advantage. So I don't think anything is going to change the Ohio State-Michigan game. Now, it may impact the next game, which is the championship game. If you're undefeated and you're Ohio State, and even if you lose, you're probably still going to get the top seed. It could affect whether you really want to risk your best quarterback or your best player. But I think the Michigan-Ohio State game is sacrosanct. I mean, that's one of the 2 or 3 biggest games of the year every single season. And back to your point, Ryan Day, even if he loses that game, he got away with that a couple of years ago because he snuck in the playoffs, and then he blew the 14-point lead against Georgia. But still, it's at the end of the year and in the offseason, in places like Michigan and Ohio State, they care about that game.
No, it's definitely sacrosanct. I don't think anybody can argue with that. I completely agree with you on that level, Paul. I will add this caveat with it as well, Doggy. No matter how many teams you want to throw into the new conference and what have you, and this is just one division now and all this other stuff.
18.
You know what I'm saying? 18 teams, right? If Michigan and Ohio State is still the creme de la creme and they're above the crowd and nobody infiltrates the proceedings, then that still solidifies. Not that the rivalry is going to be in jeopardy at all because the 2 schools are the 2 schools, and we get that. But the point is they're still expected to be the 2 elite programs. And as long as that remains intact, I don't think we have anything to worry about.
Yeah, I mean, I understand what Paul said. That game for the folks who have rooting interest is huge. But again, they're both going to be in the playoffs, Paul. You and I both know that. They're both going to be in the top 12. I don't care what happens in that game. And that, in the old days, the winner of that game goes to the Rose Bowl, the loser goes home.
Okay.
That's not longer going to happen.
Yeah, but
both going to have bigger games to play later.
Yeah, but you also got to remember. See, this is where even though Paul is older, he's younger than you because you old school. You too damn old school. What you want to do is you want to hold on to yesteryear. You see what I'm saying? You can't stand the fact that I bet you probably don't even like the 12-team playoff.
No, I actually do.
You understand what I'm saying? I mean, my point is I love it. I wish it was 16. I wish it was 16. I wish you get an opportunity. Let's have a playoff system. The fact of the matter is you can't have teams on the outside that got a shot to beat some of these teams, and they don't even get an opportunity to compete.
Georgia last year.
We know that Georgia. We know that Georgia. And don't get us started with Tulsa the year before that. We understand this stuff, so we want the playoff system, okay? We don't mind it at all. And by the way, I kind of like the idea, I might have lost to you in that season finale. I might have lost you, Ohio State, Michigan, but I get an opportunity to face you come playoff time. Listen, we were excited about that with Georgia and Alabama. Why wouldn't we be excited about that with Michigan and Ohio State?
Well, you're proving my point, and you're going against him. You're making it seem like the Michigan-Ohio State regular season game may not be as significant because they might play later on.
I'm saying it's going to always be significant no matter what. But imagine also being able to add some dressing or some icing on the cake because, that happened during the regular season, but now we got an opportunity to go against one another with a national championship on the line. We ain't seen that before. We have the potential to see it now.
All right.
I love you, Steve.
Paul, you're dismissed from this animosity.
I'm a very lovable guy.
So appreciate you. Great to see you and can't wait to see you in person.
Give me something.